Okay. Hello, can you hear me? I exist. It's dumb. I always do that. Alright. If you are here, let me know. Let me know if you can hear me and everything is good. Pause that so it doesn't lag me out. Give it a couple more seconds to make sure it's connected and everything is good. Cool. Okay. Turn my tablet back on. Make sure your quality is high so you can see all the words on the screen.
Mine says they can mostly hear you, but they can't go on the stream because they're on their phone.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Then just Facebook.
I can read their stuff through Facebook.
Yeah. Okay. If you can't hear me, let Amanda know, and she will get me to fix that. Anyway, so first of all, just an intro kind of explanation. I'm working in Photoshop CS5, and I'm going to show you how to do Photoshop brushes. These are some examples of brushes that I've made in the past. Oh goodness. Anything that got tedious or I needed a lot of, these are bad examples, but anything that got tedious or I needed a lot of, or I needed a stamp or something, I create a brush and it makes it a lot easier, especially with flowers and flower petals, because you can vary those in the brush settings, which I will show you how to do. I got sick of drawing belts. I was drawing Link, and if you've ever drawn Link or like Final Fantasy characters or characters with too many belts in anime, this helps me a lot because it just, I don't have to redraw the buckle part every time. And then I made another brush. I didn't save it properly, so it didn't work right, but if I had it set up properly, this would be making a proper belt. But I made a brush to make just a belt also. I made a crowd brush where somebody's putting their hands up, or just people in general. That's important. You know, patterns for clothing. I got sick of drawing the Master Sword and Shield because I had to do it twice, and that was just too many times for me. And so if I ever need to draw it again, there it is. I also have a tree brush that I made, which saves me so much time on backgrounds that I don't need to spend a lot of work on, and I would suggest doing your own brushes in your own line art, because then it's going to mesh with everything else that you have. I also made a rock brush and a grass brush. The grass brush that comes to Photoshop is hyper realistic and it does not look good in every situation. That is, oh goodness, that's this one. It doesn't always work. This one actually looks like it's my line art, so it's a lot easier. I also made one for icing on cakes. I did one for a cookie that I made once, and it looked cute in the background of a drawing. Whenever I do like commissions and stuff, if I have one specific object that I think is really cute, I will turn it into a brush and put it in the background. Little heart candies, hearts in general, are stamped to watermark things, sequins for clothing, spotlights are really good for brushes. I did this one for chainmail. These were made from kimono patterns. The thing I think I use brushes most for is for clothing patterns for line art. You know, you can do textures or you can do line art. I do this when I need to do chainmail. This is for like the mesh that superheroes have. This is for zippers. It's kind of crude because you can see the seams, but it's usually kind of covered up by some fabric, so it works really well for a quick zipper. Sparkles are really good too. I did anime sparkles. Once again, it's really good for stuff that's flowing in the wind, like flower petals and flowers. Those are for cherry blossoms. Our coming soon thing, so I don't have to remake it and retype it every single time. Eyelashes, you can just warp those and put those into place, and those look really good. This one's really useful. I use that for braided hair or for rope. I use that on my Boba Fett drawing. And you can do something that's just a straight line and then warp it into place, and it saves a lot of time. The brush I use the most is my stitch brush, which I use for almost all the clothing that I draw, because adding stitching towards the, you know, it's just the seam, it adds a lot of detail really easily. So, if you look at the Flash that I have, that I drew, he's got the mesh brush and the stitching brush on him, and it helped a lot with his superhero suit. So I will take you through the basics of how to just make a brush, and you can make a brush out of pretty much anything. The only thing is, if it's too large, it will not let you make a brush. The biggest problem I usually have when I go to edit, and then right next to transform and stuff, it says define brush preset. If it isn't letting you do this, it either means you don't have anything selected, you're not selected a layer, or the space that you're trying to select is too big. It can only go up to the maximum brush size, which is 2500 pixels. So just keep that in mind. So Quinn wanted to know how to make thorn brushes or vine brushes. There's multiple different ways you can create brushes so that you don't have to do something over and over again. Let's do a pretty decent-ish looking, let me just actually turn on Lazy Nesame so it doesn't look crappy. Let's do a decent looking thorn. Actually connect. Okay, so that's not... Alright, that's a pretty decent looking thorn. We can work harder to make it look prettier, but whatever. Alright, so you've got your drawing that you want to turn into a brush. Use the lasso tool or whatever selection tool you like and select it. Make sure any background layer is turned off, because if I leave this on, it will select both of these layers and I will have a, you know, gray... My brush will be this whole selection shape of gray and also this darker line rather than just this line that I want. So go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. It'll show you a really crappy version of your brush drawing because it fits it into this little square. Thorn, don't worry too much about this name because you're going to delete this brush because it's going to be the stupid version of the brush. Alright, and then we go to our brush tool, B for brush, drop down menu. It's going to show up at the very bottom of your list. Here it is right here, and it is the original size that I had it on my screen. So we select that, get on a layer that actually lets you draw on it, deselect because we had that selected. Alright, so that's a brush now, and because it's just straight out of the box, we just made it, all it can do is this. And you might not want that because, you know, this is basically a stamp. You can stamp down the exact brush, and that looks pretty cool, but there's more that we can do with this, and there's more potential to be had for this brush. So, let's make it a better brush. If you want to do that, go to this little folder with brushes in it right here, and then you're going to enter into this menu that lets you edit this brush. This is a rough preview of what it's going to look like when you click and drag your tablet pen or your mouse. You can see that it pretty much looks like that, but sometimes this is inaccurate, so always try using your brush instead of trusting what this is telling you. because sometimes it just doesn't understand what it's actually going to do. Okay, so this sets your size, obviously bigger, or smaller, bigger. This is important. This is your angle. Click on this little arrow here. If you click somewhere else, you might grab the circle or these dots, which is going to make it thinner or wider or whatever. So grab that. That changes your angle, so you can do all different angles with the same brush, which is very useful. See? Flip X or Y, that's a little self-explanatory. That flips the axis. So if you just quickly need it to go there or there, up, or, well, that flipped it. You don't really notice that a lot, but flipped. Spacing, that's the thing you're going to need immediately. This determines how far away each stamping of the brush is from the last stamp, which is why when you try to draw or erase with a normal brush, it looks like a line. But if you add the spacing, all these brushes that are line brushes are actually just dots. So you want those dots to be as close together as possible for you to get the smoothest, most close together line. Which is, by the way, why sometimes when you draw and you try to taper, it does like this little poop thing at the end. Go to your spacing and make sure it's all the way down if you're ever having trouble with a line brush. Anyway, that is just a thing that I notice a lot with my eraser happens, and I dislike it greatly. Alright, so back to this brush. Let's up the spacing so that it's not touching itself every time it gets stamped down there. So there we go. Okay, maybe a little more spacing would be useful because we want it to be varied. I'm assuming we're going to say this is a vine. That's a very basic way to add thorns to something. Now, the problem with this is that if you have a vine, you know, going in this direction, they're all going to be facing the same way, which is not what we want. You can do size jitter, which makes it so that this will choose, it will be bigger or smaller depending on how hard you press the brush. You could make it a fade. I do pen pressure, so a fade makes it, the longer you are pressing the brush, it goes away. That's useful for color for me in case I want gradients. But let's just do that. You can add a minimum diameter to your shape, to your size jitter, which makes it so that it can only be so small, so you're not starting with like tiny little guys. They all should be, we want it to be varied, but we don't want it to be like super crazy small compared to the other ones, so that should be good. Moving on. If you want it, the shape to be a little bit more varied, you can do roundness jitter, which you can see happening down here. Just kind of, it makes, oh, that's awesome. That looks really cool. Amanda just finished coloring Star versus the Forces of Evil. It looks cool. Roundness just kind of changes the shape. This is all interpreting this brush as a circle, and every, like, the area of the hitbox basically of this brush is a circle. So if you think of that, it makes sense as to why it's squishing it in this way. Because it's basically thinking there's a circle here with stuff in it. If I squish the circle, this is what it does to it. Does that make sense? I don't know. Tell me if what I'm saying just totally makes no sense. Anyway, that helps change the size a little bit. Scattering is interesting. This is what we use for like sparkle brushes and flowers in the wind and stuff. This basically scatters everything. So when you put your brush down, it's not just in a line, it's all over the place. That's useful for like craggy rocks all over a scene, or, you know, this is not useful for us right now. But that is more useful for things like, imagine if these were falling in the wind, you'd have a pretty cool, you know, area of stuff, and you can add a count that adds just more stuff. Basically, play around with the different panels and try. Texture I don't really use because it adds a texture, but then it kind of makes it really dark. Dual brush, I don't want to go into that right now. Color dynamics is fun because if we put hue jitter all the way up here, and then we do a color.
Ada likes to make things rainbow.
I do like to make things rainbow.
Because Ada's good.
Rainbow. Spikeums. Brightness jitter lets it get really dark or really bright. I like to keep it pretty pure. Saturation makes it be gray or bright. If you do all of these, all the craziness, you can have every color in the swatch book. Just anything is possible. But I usually like to keep the brightness where it's at, keep the saturation where it's at, and then all different types of colors. And foreground background jitter, I guess, would be it's useful if you don't have a lot of hue jitter and you've got like yellow and pink, for example. Then it's going to take your foreground, which is your yellow, and your background, which is your pink, and jitter between those two, and also add hue jitter to that. So a couple different yellows and a couple different pinks. So that looks like this. So we've got some oranges in here from the, that could be from the pink or the yellow, and some green from the yellow. Let's do something super different. Huh. Maybe it only does it jitters between the two. I don't know. Whatever. You can play with that. Whatever. It's a brush. There it is. It does stuff. Transfer basically changes the opacity, so it can overlap itself a little bit more. Anyway, we don't need that. We don't need color dynamics, even though they're fun. Smoothing is useful. It just kind of smooths in general. Wet edges makes it look like it's wet. Noise makes it basically speckled inside of it. So we probably only need shape dynamics to add variation to things. And the angle jitter, that's what I meant to go over. That rotates everything. So it could be up here, it could be to the side, it could be down. If you do it all the way 100%, it is going to be any angle possible. If you do it only a little bit, it's going to go side to side, just a little bit of variation. So, using all of that knowledge, we can, we can make a brush that will work for something that we can use. I would vary the angle a little bit. We don't want it to flip upside down, so we don't want Y jitter on, but we do want X flip jitter so that it can wiggle back and forth between the right side and the left side. So that looks pretty good. So there's a line of thorns. So what we can do here is, okay, oh, next, click this little new and save it. If you go away from this brush after doing all that work and you don't save it, this brush, which is the first one we made, is going to go back to that. That's why I said don't worry about that one too much, because we're going to delete it. Also, don't forget, it saves the size that you had it on, so whatever size you use most, make sure your brush is set to that. So let's make a vine. R.I.P. vine. And create thorns for that vine. Let's pretend that that's another chunk of vine.
Cover USB is full of BT-dubs.
Okay, we can fix it. Alright, I'm going to do this on a separate layer. I'm going to lock that so I don't mess it up. Yeah. Hi, little baby. Hi, Spoot. Are you talking?
Spoot talking?
Spoot's talking. My cat that never talks is talking. Alright, so we can still stamp what we want with this brush. Why is this not getting bigger? I'm going to actually turn off size jitter so I have more control.
Thank you. You're a good boy.
Alright, so there's one. There's one. Let's do some smaller ones at a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
Boof. Well, this is where you want to play with your shape dynamics, because if the angle jitter is a little too crazy for you, then just turn it down so you have more control. But this is how I would use this brush. Let's change the angle downward and do some of this. Oh yeah, that's good stuff. I know spikes on vines are usually like not that varied in size, but just to show what we're doing. Okay, so I'm going back down to my vine, and I'm going to erase here and let our... I'm going to do this really fast, and it's going to look really terrible, but like, just get what I'm saying, you know. So getting rid of all of that stuff, and then we go back to our thorn layer, and I'm going to not be able to do anything because Lazy Nezumi is on, and then get rid of this so that those are underneath there. And that is kind of what I would do to do that. To be completely honest, I think the way I would actually do this, I would have size jitter completely off, angle jitter completely off, and I would do a little roundness. Oh, hello, I'm not even on the brush I was talking about. I'm on the eraser. That's why things are hard to understand. Okay. Size jitter I would turn off. Angle jitter I would turn off. I would do roundness jitter just to give it some variation, but I'm still going to be in control. I'm not going to flip anything, and I will keep minimum roundness at about there. So yeah, and if you really need to change the shape of the brush, you can grab one of these dots here and kind of mess with it a little bit. But I would probably keep my control as my main priority with how I set this brush up. And why is it so weird now? What did I do? It's because I turned the roundness jitter up. That's too much. Yeah. But I would do that, and this is what I do with my stitch brush. I just keep changing the angle and then dropping more thorns in there. And that's pretty much how I make all my brushes. Do you have any other questions? Does this answer your question? Does this help? Yeah. Also, there's a way to make... Let me see if there's a good way to make a thorn brush. Because if you draw a really nice shape and you just want to paste it again, like, you totally can. Like, let me show you an example. If you're still paying attention, if you're still having the time to watch me do random crap with Photoshop. Let's say you really like this vine that you drew, and turn that off. Alright, so we make a brush out of it. Define brush preset. Fine. Deselect. Go to brushes. Go to B for brush. Go down to the bottom of my brushes. Grab that. Open up my brush folder. Spacing so that I'm not pooping a million of them at once. Alright. Make that smaller. Alright, so let's say we wanted to put down a bunch of vines. So let's say we've got one here, then we change the angle a little bit. We want the thicker part to be on the right side, so we flip the x-axis. Alright, so we do one there. Do a bigger one there. And then we want one across here, but it's not quite right. So we can stretch this. Well, that helps. But I want it to be more curved. So let's go to Edit, Transform, Warp. And this is like one of my favorite tools in Photoshop because it is so freaking useful. You can warp anything. Just be careful when you're doing it with line art because it can pixelate the lines if you stretch it too far. Or it can make things cover other things up, or you can like just be really cautious and double check all your connections of your lines. So
Yes, that could also be turned into a brush.
what could?
The pattern on someone's sleeve.
Yes. Brushes are super useful for logos or
The way I would go
textures.
about turning that into a brush is I would use one of the more repetitive pieces, make a long strip that's going to fit into that section of the sleeve, and then use the Transform Warp tool to actually give it the expanding width at the bottom to fit with the sleeve.
Yes. That. You can also use the pattern stamp tool, but I am not as versed with that. Which can do stuff that's already colored and like keeps itself. Yeah. So this is like, you know that show Chowder, where like they've got patterns in the background while they move? That's kind of like what this is. So you could always use this brush. And I do not know how to use this as well.
What?
The pattern brush.
Do you want me to use it?
Sure. Do you know how to, like, can you do like a little short tutorial on how to do this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't know what I'm doing. Amanda's
Can you
going
go
to show
grab
you.
Quinn's photo example?
Oh, yeah. Gimme, 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 gimme the bread. That's Abu. Look at Star. Yeah. Okay. No, go away. That's a secret chat. Secret. Wait, let me, I have a tab for this. Oh. I also have, cross-hatching brushes, which would also be useful for that, but that could work as a pattern. I'm going to give the thing to Amanda. Oh, baby, did you put yourself in jail?
Alright, so I like to use patterns a lot of the time versus brushes. Most of my patterns I end up doing just in black and white, but you can obviously do them colored as well. To do a pattern, it's the same basic steps, except instead of define brush, you define a pattern. So for his sleeve here, you want that section. The most important thing with a pattern is making sure whatever it is you select can continuously repeat. If it can do that, you can make a pattern. So I'm gonna, oops, it did not take what I wanted. So we want to work with this. So in order to make a pattern, I'm gonna post, let's see, I'll bring in the second one. Why is your computer moving so slow? Seriously.
What's it doing?
It's just moving incredibly slow. Oh, maybe it was your mouse speed was set to super slow.
Lazy Nezumi's on.
That could potentially be it.
It affects that, so it wasn't good like that.
So if I flip this horizontally, you see right here we're starting to create a nice pattern. I'm going to go ahead, combine these two layers, duplicate it again, hit OK, Control T, flip vertical, and then right here in the center you have a continuous pattern. This one is obviously a little janky because I didn't draw it myself, but it'll mostly do the job. So you want to make sure you are selecting a good portion of it. I'm going to select the whole thing. Combining layers, and then do File, Define Pattern. It's going to try and define everything. So I'm just going to select it then. Do File, Edit, Define Pattern. Okay, Pattern 1. So then if I go in with my pattern brush on a new layer, as long as I go and select the new pattern that we made, that's what it's going to give me. And it's going to repeat it over and over and over again. You'll notice because I didn't make it perfect, there's some extra in there, but...
How do you make the pattern bigger?
It just depends on how big of a size you select at the time.
You can't, like, size up and down the pattern that you really...
No. Once you make a pattern, however big it was made is how big it stays. No matter your canvas or brush size.
I guess it's on a layer, so you can just size it up, right?
Yeah, you could do that. So I have a couple here, but I'm going to use a different one. Oh my god, all these suck. How do you not have patterns? Okay, well I'm going to use the shitty bubble pattern then to make my point. So we got a sleeve here, right? Let's pretend his sleeve is a shitty bubble pattern. So what I would do is I was
trying to not cuss on this one.
Too late. Is I would make something about the size of the sleeve that you need, and then Control T, and you want to warp it. And so I'm going to bring that down, make the bottom larger, oops, make the top smaller, and as you do that you can see it's affecting the pattern that's in there. And what this does is it gives you a more kind of lifelike effect. And then I just go in and I just erase all the excess I don't need. So erase down the side here. I mean, it's a really bad job, but you're getting what I'm saying, I think. Hey, Aiden, you want to check the chat like I was doing for you?
Yeah, my chat's doing. They haven't said anything.
Okay. And then if needed, you can always, like, make the pattern bigger or whatever.
Oh no! Oh no, it's still on the one moment. Oh, it's been on the one moment this whole time. I'm sorry.
I'll try that again.
I'm sorry.
Alright. So basically, in order to create a pattern, you need a continuous shape like the one that I have here. I'm going to go ahead and create another pattern out of this, so I'm going to use my select tool, and I'm going to select onto the inside here, and then do edit, define pattern. My suggestion to you would be actually draw the pattern that you need and then define the pattern. Take your pattern brush tool, it'll show up as the last thing in there, just like a normal brush. I'll create a new layer, and there you see we have this pattern coming in. Pattern. It's a continuous pattern, so it would take over the whole sheet if I drew it that way. So, when you're doing something like his sleeve, Like I said, I'm going to use the bubble thing for the moment because it's better defined pattern than the one I just did. You want to kind of size it close to there, and then just color in your pattern where his sleeve is. Make it a little bit wider, but you'll notice it's really flat and his sleeve is not. So if you do Control T and then you can right click and go to warp, you can start warping this pattern to kind of match the flow of his sleeve. So I'm going to bring it in. This part I'm going to bring out some. This one I'm going to bring down and out more. This part is going to come in more. Okay. And I'm going to hit apply. And then I'm going to grab my eraser and I'm just going to kind of terribly erase around it. So that's what a warped pattern would look like. Let me grab the pattern. So just so you can see the difference, if you just colored it in, that versus warping it that. It's a subtle difference, but it is one that helps create the shape of your character. So, do patterns make sense or no? You good?
And just saw the chat. 1 second. Oh. What? I just switched to their laptop and they're on the screen now. How do you draw a seamless pattern? Repeat the question in case the camera couldn't hear me.
So how do you draw a seamless pattern? Basically, let me grab a brush. Oh goodness. Let me turn on laziness of me here. So let's say you want this pattern to be a crosshatch pattern. You're going to want to draw it better than I am. And let's say it's mostly this crosshatch triangle that we care about. So I'm going to turn it like that. And I'm going to make a selection of it. We're going to cut that, and I can delete that layer because I don't want the rest of it. And so a big part of creating a seamless pattern, if you will, has to come with flipping things vertical and horizontally. As long as you've mirrored your pattern. Oh, laziness me still on 1 second. So I have my pattern mirrored. This is the pattern I'm looking for. Maybe I'm actually going to bring it in some. And basically this ensures that my pattern is the same on all sides. I can go in with my marquee tool, make the selection I want to make. I'm going to keep it within the black lines. Edit, define pattern. Might have hit cancel there. I did. So edit, define pattern, pattern 3. So if I go in now, on a new layer, I have pattern 3, and you can see it works fine. You can see on the one edge, I left accidentally a little bit of the gray. You just got to make sure you're staying within your line the whole time. Let's say I want that pattern to be smaller, so all I have to do is take my test swatch and shrink that. And I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to hit OK. You'll see there's a little bit off on my pattern there. There's a little gray on the top and on the side there, so I'm going to just pull this in and do edit, define pattern, hit OK, and then if I go to this now, which I'm going to turn off the rest of this junk, and I go in with my pattern brush. That was the old pattern right here, and then this is the smaller pattern. Does that make sense?
I can think of one other way to do that. Thanks, that was really helpful. I always wondered how to do that. If you have something more intricate that you're like drawing, you could use the you know that brush that like captures an area of your canvas and has you basically pattern copy that while you're drawing?
Yeah.
You could do that in a block, like do squares and do a block next to it. So this
Yep, totally could. Another thing that a lot of people do, which is why most patterns you can download are so big, is they'll just make a canvas and do a ton of different effects to it to create like grunge patterns and stuff like that. And patterns act just like normal layers here. You can, you know, lighten, screen, darken, whatever it is you need to do. You'll also notice because my patterns were on a gray background when I copied them, that gray stays in the pattern. In order to not have gray in the pattern, you need to have it on the clear checkerboard background. And let me zoom in, get back to here. Select what you want to have be the pattern again. Edit, define pattern, OK. And you'll see, you can see the checkerboard in the background. So I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to go, we'll turn on some of the patterns Aiden was doing. Ooh, too far up. And we'll go to the pattern brush. So this was the last pattern I had defined. And we'll do a layer on top so I'm not affecting it. Oops. Where's my pattern stand?
something selected?
Yes. Okay, never mind. I had something selected still. So,
Did you enter a quick mask?
so you can see there, it colors it over, makes it gray, versus the new one, which had nothing in the background, and now you can see what was behind it. Anything that was, put the fishy in jail.
No.
Jail fishies.
No.
Jail fishies.
Why fishies?
I don't know. So, and then to actually make a point to show, not necessarily lighten, but saturation. There you go. Now the fishies are patterned. I'm going to zoom in and play with that for a second.
Souls are in jail.
Their souls. If I do darken, we end up with the black again. Multiply. Darker color. Overlay, you know, more jail fishies.
No.
Jail fishies.
No.
So, anyway, does that help? Does that answer questions? Make things easy, simple, happiness? Yeah.
Yes. Thanks a lot.
Sweet. I'm going to end the stream then.
Wait, I wanted to try the one thing that I was thinking of to see if it works.
What?
The,
Well, you need to try it on stream.
alright. Bye.
Bye.